She said my dream job would be career suicide in the middle of nowhere. I should have known then that Kendra valued her comfort zone more than our future together. The email from BioCore Technologies arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was debugging database queries at my current position as a senior systems architect. The subject line read, Chief Technology Officer Opportunity, Confidential Inquiry, and I almost deleted it assuming it was spam. Instead, I opened what would become the catalyst for discovering who Kendra really was beneath her polished exterior. The recruiter explained that BioCore, a cutting-edge biotech startup, needed someone with my specific background in medical database architecture to lead their technology division as CTO. The compensation package was staggering, $285,000 base salary plus equity options that could reach $400,000 annually if the company hit its growth targets. The catch was location. Willowbrook, a rural town of 25,000 people nestled around a pristine lake about 4 hours from our current metropolitan area. I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just a job offer, it was the kind of career-defining opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. I immediately began researching BioCore and discovered they were developing revolutionary medical diagnostic software that could transform early disease detection. The technology was legitimate, the funding was substantial, and the leadership team included veterans from major pharmaceutical companies. As I read through the detailed offer letter, I realized this position would not only accelerate my career by at least 5 years but also provide the financial security Kendra and I had discussed for our future family. I drove home that evening practically vibrating with anticipation, already imagining how thrilled Kendra would be when I shared this incredible news. We'd been engaged for 8 months, together for 5 years, and frequently talked about wanting to buy our first house and start building real wealth together. This opportunity would make all those dreams possible much sooner than we'd ever imagined. I found Kendra in our apartment's kitchen, scrolling through her phone while reheating leftover takeout she'd ordered for dinner. She worked as an event planning coordinator for a mid-sized firm, managing corporate gatherings and wedding receptions with her characteristic attention to detail and social finesse. I sat down across from her, barely able to contain my excitement as I began explaining about the CTO position, the company's promising technology, and the incredible compensation package they'd offered me. Kendra's expression shifted from mild interest to visible irritation before I'd even finished describing the role's responsibilities. She set down her phone and gave me that look I'd learned meant she'd already decided something was a terrible idea before hearing all the details. When I mentioned Willowbrook, she actually laughed out loud, a sharp sound that didn't match her usually melodic voice. She immediately dismissed the entire opportunity without asking a single question about the company, the technology, or even the salary figures I'd started to share. According to Kendra, accepting any position outside our current metropolitan area would constitute career suicide, and relocating to what she called the middle of nowhere was absolutely out of the question for someone with her established professional network. I tried explaining that Willowbrook wasn't actually isolated, it was a charming lakeside community with growing tech sector and excellent quality of life, but she cut me off before I could elaborate. Her established client network and urban lifestyle were completely non-negotiable, she declared with finality that surprised me. Every attempt I made over the following days to revisit the conversation ended the same way: anger, accusations of selfishness, and her insistence that I was being unrealistic about what rural life actually offered. She refused to look at any information I'd gathered about Willowbrook, wouldn't review the compensation details, and seemed genuinely offended that I'd even considered the possibility without consulting her first. The most telling moment came when I suggested we could at least visit Willowbrook for a weekend to see the area firsthand before making any decisions. Kendra's response was immediate and absolute. There was nothing in some small town that could possibly justify abandoning everything they'd built in the city, and she wasn't going to waste a weekend entertaining my fantasy about rural success. I began to realize that Kendra wasn't just being cautious or needing time to process a major change, she was prioritizing her personal comfort zone over any consideration of our shared future, and she expected me to do the same without question. While Kendra continued shutting down every attempt at discussion about the CTO position, I decided to conduct my own thorough research about both Biocore Technologies and Willowbrook itself. What I discovered completely contradicted her assumptions about career suicide in the middle of nowhere. Willowbrook wasn't some forgotten rural outpost. It was actually a thriving community that had attracted several tech companies seeking lower operating costs and higher quality of life for their employees. The town featured a charming downtown district with locally owned restaurants, craft breweries, and boutique shops that rivaled anything in our current city. More importantly, the lakeside location offered recreational opportunities I'd only dreamed about: sailing, hiking trails, and waterfront properties that cost a fraction of urban real estate prices. The housing market data was particularly eye-opening. I could purchase a beautiful lakefront home in Willowbrook for less than we'd pay for a cramped condo in our current metropolitan area. Meanwhile, Kendra had enlisted our mutual friends to reinforce her position, creating an echo chamber of support for her refusal to even consider the opportunity. She'd carefully framed the situation as me having a sudden irrational desire to abandon our established life for some risky venture in an isolated location. Our friend group, most of whom had never lived outside major cities, readily agreed that leaving our metropolitan area would be professional and social suicide. The breaking point came during a dinner party at our friends Marcus and Jenny's apartment, where Kendra had clearly orchestrated an intervention designed to talk sense into me about my ridiculous small-town fantasy. I found myself surrounded by people who'd never heard of Biocore Technologies, didn't understand the biotech industry, and had no context for evaluating the career opportunity I'd been offered. When I tried explaining the company's innovative medical diagnostic software and the potential impact on early disease detection, Marcus actually laughed and said I sounded like someone who'd been recruited into a pyramid scheme. Jenny chimed in that everyone knew the real tech opportunities were in major metropolitan areas, and anyone serious about their career wouldn't consider relocating to what she called some random lake town. The most humiliating moment came when Kendra stood up and delivered what felt like a prepared speech about how I was being delusional and selfish, prioritizing some fantasy over our real relationship and established life together. Our friends nodded along supportively, clearly having been briefed on her perspective beforehand. Not one person asked about the compensation package, the company's funding, or the actual scope of the CTO role I'd been offered. I sat there listening to people who claimed to care about my future dismiss the biggest career opportunity of my life based on geographic prejudice and complete ignorance about the industry. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I secretly accepted the CTO position at Biocore Technologies. I spent the next 2 months discreetly preparing for the transition while Kendra remained oblivious to my planning. I negotiated a remote work arrangement with my current employer to maintain some income during the transition period, researched housing options in Willowbrook's most desirable lakefront neighborhoods, and set up new banking accounts to handle my relocation package and signing bonus. The preparation required careful coordination, scheduling phone interviews during lunch breaks, reviewing architectural plans for potential homes while Kendra was at work, and researching the town's amenities and community organizations. I discovered that Willowbrook hosted an annual sailing regatta, had an active hiking club, and featured restaurants that had earned recognition in regional food magazines. The more I learned, the more excited I became about the lifestyle change this opportunity represented. When Kendra began noticing my increasingly distant behavior and distracted demeanor, she attributed it to work stress rather than considering that her dismissive attitude might be affecting our relationship. She actually became more demanding about our social calendar, booking dinner reservations and weekend activities without consulting me, seemingly determined to prove that our current lifestyle was superior to anything a small town could offer. Her behavior reached a new level of presumption when she booked an expensive vacation to a resort in the Caribbean, charging it to our shared credit card and announcing the trip as a surprise designed to help me forget about my quarter-life crisis. She'd planned the entire week-long getaway around her assumption that I would abandon what she called my ridiculous small-town fantasy to maintain our current comfortable lifestyle together. 3 weeks before my official start date as CTO at Biocore Technologies, I finally told Kendra that I had already accepted the position and would be relocating to Willowbrook with or without her. Her initial reaction was laughter, genuine, disbelieving laughter that suggested she thought I was making an elaborate joke about something we'd already settled months ago. When she realized I was completely serious about leaving our 5-year relationship behind for what she still considered a fantasy job, her amusement transformed into something approaching hysteria. I watched her cycle through the stages of realization: confusion about when I'd made this decision, panic about the implications for our engagement, and finally rage when she understood that I'd been planning this transition without consulting her for months. She demanded to know how I could make such a massive life decision without her input, conveniently forgetting that she'd refused to provide any meaningful input beyond immediate rejection and mockery. I explained that I'd tried repeatedly to discuss the opportunity with her, but every conversation had ended with her dismissing my perspective and enlisting our friends to reinforce her position. The turning point in our relationship breakdown came when Kendra discovered that I'd already signed a lease on a lakefront cottage in Willowbrook and arranged for professional movers to handle my belongings. She'd been going through my desk looking for our vacation itinerary when she found the rental agreement and moving company contracts. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused me of betraying our entire relationship by making secret plans while pretending to be committed to our future together. I pointed out that I'd been completely transparent about wanting to accept the CTO position, and her refusal to even consider the possibility didn't constitute my betrayal of anything. We'd never actually discussed compromising or finding middle ground because she'd never acknowledged that any middle ground existed. The conversation revealed how fundamentally different our approaches to major decisions had become. I wanted partnership and collaboration, while she expected compliance with her predetermined conclusions. Kendra's response to losing control of the situation was to move out immediately, packing her belongings while delivering a monologue about my selfishness and immaturity. She went to stay with her sister Melissa, who lived across town and had apparently been providing encouragement for Kendra's stubborn position throughout our months of conflict. Within hours of leaving our apartment, Kendra had blocked me on all social media platforms and begun spreading her carefully crafted narrative about my midlife crisis and abandonment to anyone who would listen. According to mutual friends who reached out with concern, she was describing my career change as a sudden psychological breakdown triggered by work stress and fear of commitment. Her version of events portrayed me as someone who'd panicked about our engagement and invented an elaborate excuse to avoid taking the next step in our relationship. The most frustrating aspect of her narrative was how it completely erased the legitimate career opportunity I'd been offered, reducing my decision to psychological instability rather than professional advancement. Our final conversation took place over the phone 2 days before my departure for Willowbrook, when Kendra called to make one last attempt at changing my mind. She'd clearly been crying, and her voice had that raw quality that comes from hours of emotional exhaustion. She apologized for her previous reaction and promised to be more supportive if I would reconsider relocating for what she still called a risky career move. When I explained that my decision was final and the moving truck would arrive the next morning, she became increasingly desperate, offering compromises she'd never been willing to discuss before. She suggested we could maintain a long-distance relationship while I tested whether the job would work out, or perhaps she could visit Willowbrook occasionally to evaluate whether she might eventually be willing to relocate. Her sudden flexibility felt manipulative rather than genuine. She was offering concessions only because she was losing control, not because she developed any real understanding of or support for my goals. The conversation ended with Kendra screaming that I was throwing away everything we'd built together for some fantasy job that would probably fail within a year, leaving me stranded in a small town with no real career prospects. Even in her final desperate moments, she never asked about the actual compensation package, never inquired about BioCore's funding or growth prospects, and never showed any curiosity about what the CTO role would actually involve. Her focus remained entirely on what she was losing rather than what I might be gaining, and she seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that I'd found something more valuable than the comfortable but limiting life we'd been living together. Moving to Willowbrook turned out to be the best decision I'd ever made, both personally and professionally. The lakefront cottage I'd rented was everything the photos had promised. A charming 2-bedroom place with a private dock and panoramic views of the water that I could never have afforded in our former metropolitan area. I woke up each morning to the sound of lapping waves instead of traffic noise, and my daily commute to BioCore's offices took 15 minutes through scenic tree-lined streets rather than an hour of highway congestion. Within my first month, I joined the local sailing club and discovered a community of professionals who'd made similar relocations from major cities, all drawn by the combination of career opportunities and quality of life that Willowbrook offered. My role as Chief Technology Officer proved even more challenging and rewarding than I'd anticipated during the interview process. BioCore's medical diagnostics software represented genuinely revolutionary technology. Our algorithms could detect early-stage diseases from routine blood work with unprecedented accuracy, potentially saving thousands of lives through earlier intervention. Leading a team of brilliant developers and data scientists energized me in ways my previous position never had, and the startup environment meant my decisions had immediate impact on both the product and the company's trajectory. The equity compensation component of my package became particularly valuable as BioCore attracted attention from major pharmaceutical companies interested in licensing our diagnostic protocols. Within 6 months of joining the company, my stock options had vested significantly due to our rapid growth and successful clinical trials, bringing my total annual compensation to $340,000, far exceeding even the optimistic projections from my original offer letter. The financial success enabled me to purchase a beautiful Victorian home just 2 blocks from the lake, complete with original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and enough space for the home office I'd always wanted. The entire property cost $275,000, which was less than we would have paid for a cramped 2-bedroom condo in our former city, and I was able to make the purchase with cash thanks to my signing bonus and first-year earnings. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kendra's concerns about career suicide had been completely backwards. I was making more money, enjoying better work, and living in a more beautiful setting than anything our previous metropolitan area could have offered. Meanwhile, mutual acquaintances from our former social circle began reaching out with subtle questions about my career change, having heard conflicting stories from Kendra about why our engagement had ended. The carefully crafted narrative she'd spread about my midlife crisis and psychological breakdown was becoming harder to maintain as word spread about my professional success and obvious contentment with small-town life. I'd started posting occasional photos of sailing adventures and hiking excursions on social media, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because I was genuinely happy and wanted to share my experiences with friends who might be interested. The contrast between my current lifestyle and the stress-filled urban existence I'd left behind was striking. I had time for hobbies, genuine friendships with neighbors, and a sense of community connection that had been completely missing from our previous apartment building where we'd barely known our neighbors' names. The town's restaurant scene proved surprisingly sophisticated, with several establishments that featured locally sourced ingredients and creative menus that rivaled anything from our former city's dining districts. I discovered a small bistro run by a chef who'd relocated from New York specifically to be part of Willowbrook's growing culinary reputation and regularly attended wine tastings and cultural events that attracted visitors from across the region. The combination of professional fulfillment, financial success, and improved quality of life created a level of satisfaction I'd never experienced before, and I began to understand how much I'd been settling for mediocrity in both my career and personal life. The moment that completely destroyed Kendra's carefully constructed narrative came when BioCore Technologies announced a major breakthrough that landed us on the front pages of both TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal's healthcare section. Our diagnostic software had successfully completed Phase 3 clinical trials with results that exceeded even our most optimistic projections, leading to immediate interest from 3 major pharmaceutical companies for licensing agreements. As Chief Technology Officer, I was prominently featured in all the coverage, with journalists praising the innovative architecture I'd designed for processing massive datasets of medical information. My LinkedIn profile exploded with congratulations from former colleagues, job offers from competing companies, and connection requests from venture capitalists who'd suddenly discovered my existence. The Business Journal in our former metropolitan area picked up the story and ran a feature article about successful tech executives who'd relocated to smaller markets, complete with details about my compensation package and BioCore's recent $85 million valuation that made my equity worth substantially more than anyone had initially projected. Suddenly, it became impossible for Kendra and our former mutual friends to ignore the reality of my actual professional success, and the narrative about career suicide in the middle of nowhere began crumbling under the weight of objective evidence. I started receiving apologetic messages from people who'd mocked my decision at that humiliating dinner party, with several admitting they'd been completely wrong about both the opportunity and my judgment in pursuing it. Marcus sent a particularly awkward email acknowledging that he'd been ignorant about the biotech industry and asking if BioCore might have any openings for someone with his marketing background, apparently having researched our company's growth prospects after seeing the news coverage. Jenny reached out through mutual friends to express regret about calling my career move delusional, though her apology felt more motivated by embarrassment about being publicly wrong than genuine remorse for undermining my confidence. The most satisfying vindication came when the local Chamber of Commerce in our former city invited me to speak at their annual technology summit about successful entrepreneurship and career transitions, clearly having forgotten that 18 months earlier their social circles had dismissed me as suffering from a psychological breakdown. Meanwhile, Kendra's response to my obvious success revealed the true depth of her character flaws and manipulative tendencies. Instead of acknowledging that she'd been wrong about the opportunity or apologizing for her lack of support, she began sending increasingly desperate emails asking why I'd never properly explained the position's potential or BioCore's legitimacy during our relationship. According to her revised version of events, I'd been secretive about the job details and hadn't given her sufficient information to make an informed decision about relocating, conveniently forgetting that she'd refused to review any materials I'd tried to share or ask any questions about the compensation package. Her attempts at rewriting history became even more absurd when she claimed that she'd been supportive of my career ambitions but concerned about the risks of joining an unproven startup, despite the fact that she'd never once inquired about BioCore's funding, leadership team, or technology platform. She seemed to genuinely believe that her lack of interest in learning about my career opportunity had somehow been my fault for not forcing her to pay attention to information she'd actively rejected. The emails escalated from subtle attempts at reconnection to increasingly frantic messages about how we'd both made mistakes and should reconsider our decision to end the relationship over what she now characterized as a communication failure rather than her fundamental lack of support for my professional goals. Her new narrative portrayed our breakup as a tragic misunderstanding between two people who'd simply failed to properly discuss an opportunity that had obviously worked out well for both of us, since she was now claiming credit for encouraging me to take risks and pursue ambitious career moves. When email pleas failed to generate the response she wanted, Kendra escalated to showing up unannounced at my Victorian home in Willowbrook on a Saturday morning in early spring. I discovered later that she'd driven 4 hours from our former metropolitan area while researching expensive lakefront properties on her phone, clearly having investigated the local real estate market to understand exactly how well my relocation had worked out financially. Her sudden appearance at my front door represented a level of desperation I'd never seen from her during our 5-year relationship, complete with tears, apologies, and promises to relocate immediately if I'd consider giving our engagement another chance. She claimed to have realized how wrong she'd been about small-town life and expressed amazement at Willowbrook's charm, the beautiful lakefront setting, and the obvious prosperity of the community she'd once dismissed as career suicide territory. I recognized her sudden enthusiasm for everything she'd previously rejected as calculated manipulation rather than genuine change of heart, especially since her newfound appreciation for Willowbrook had emerged precisely when she learned about my financial success and professional recognition. Her promises to build a thriving event planning business in the area rang hollow considering she'd spent months insisting that no legitimate career opportunities existed outside major metropolitan areas. The conversation revealed that she'd been monitoring my social media posts and LinkedIn updates obsessively, tracking every detail of my professional achievements and lifestyle improvements while maintaining her blocked status on all platforms. She'd clearly researched BioCore's valuation, my compensation package, and the local real estate market thoroughly enough to understand exactly what she'd lost by refusing to support my career transition. When I remained unmoved by her tearful apologies and promises of transformation, Kendra attempted to involve my family in her reconciliation campaign, calling my parents with elaborate stories about wanting to work things out and being willing to compromise on location if I'd consider rebuilding our relationship. My mother later told me that Kendra had painted herself as the victim of poor communication rather than acknowledging her role in undermining my confidence and dismissing my career goals, conveniently omitting the months of ridicule and social pressure she'd orchestrated to prevent my relocation. Simultaneously, Kendra launched a social media campaign about the importance of financial transparency in relationships, posting inspirational quotes about partners supporting each other's dreams and sharing articles about successful couples who'd made major life changes together. The irony of someone who'd refused to review compensation details or ask questions about my opportunity now advocating for financial transparency was apparently lost on her, though several mutual friends began commenting with pointed observations about her sudden change in perspective. Her efforts backfired spectacularly when people who remembered her original position began calling her out publicly, posting screenshots of her previous social media rants about my selfishness and psychological instability alongside her new posts about supporting partners' career ambitions. The contradiction between her past behavior and current messaging became so obvious that even her closest supporters began questioning her credibility and motivations. The situation reached peak desperation when Kendra hired a family law attorney to explore potential claims about concealed assets during our engagement, apparently convinced that my failure to force her to review compensation details constituted some form of financial deception that entitled her to compensation. The legal threat was both laughable and revealing. She was simultaneously claiming that I'd hidden information from her while also admitting that she'd never asked for the information she now considered crucial to our relationship decisions. My attorney easily dismissed her claims by providing documentation of my repeated attempts to discuss the opportunity with her, including email timestamps showing when I'd sent her materials about BioCore that she'd never opened, voicemail transcripts of unanswered calls about compensation details, and witness statements from friends who'd observed her dismissive attitude during our relationship conflicts. The legal letter my attorney sent in response pointed out that refusing to participate in financial discussions doesn't create grounds for claiming financial concealment, and that her documented public statements about my career move being psychological instability undermined any claims about wanting to be included in the decision-making process. Kendra's attorney apparently advised her to drop the matter immediately after reviewing the evidence, leaving her with nothing but legal bills and further damage to her reputation among people who'd witnessed her increasingly desperate attempts at reconciliation. 18 months after relocating to Willowbrook, BioCore Technologies went public in what became one of the most successful biotech IPOs of the year, making my equity worth over $800,000 and bringing my total annual compensation to $485,000 when including my salary, bonuses, and stock appreciation. The financial transformation was staggering. I'd gone from being a comfortable but unremarkable systems architect to becoming genuinely wealthy by any reasonable standard, all while living in a community where my money went exponentially further than it would have in our former metropolitan area. My lakefront Victorian home had appreciated significantly as more technology professionals discovered Willowbrook's advantages, and I'd been able to invest the majority of my increased earnings in a diversified portfolio that was building long-term wealth I'd never imagined possible. More importantly than the financial success, I'd found genuine happiness with Rachel Morrison, a marine biologist who worked at the State University's freshwater research facility and shared my passion for sailing and outdoor activities. Rachel was everything Kendra had never been: intellectually curious, professionally accomplished, financially independent, and completely unimpressed by status symbols or expensive lifestyle displays. She drove a practical Subaru because it handled lake weather conditions well, preferred hiking boots to designer heels, and got genuinely excited discussing her research on invasive species management rather than gossiping about other people's relationships or careers. Our relationship developed naturally around shared interests and compatible values rather than social expectations or financial convenience, and she couldn't have cared less about designer brands, expensive restaurants, or maintaining appearances for social media validation. Rachel's reaction to learning about my compensation had been practical curiosity about investment strategies rather than excitement about increased spending opportunities, And she consistently insisted on splitting expenses despite my substantially higher income because she valued financial independence over being subsidized by a romantic partner. The contrast between Rachel's character and Kendra's priorities became even more apparent when I received a final email from my former fiancé that acknowledged how completely she'd misunderstood both my potential and my priorities. Kendra's message was genuinely apologetic rather than manipulative, admitting that she'd lost someone who'd wanted to build a real partnership based on mutual support and shared ambitions rather than maintaining comfortable stagnation. She acknowledged that her refusal to even consider my career opportunity had revealed that she valued status and security over growth and adventure, and that her behavior during our relationship breakdown had demonstrated how little she'd actually understood about my character or goals. For the first time since our initial conflict, Kendra took responsibility for her choices rather than blaming communication failures or claiming she'd been inadequately informed about decisions she'd refused to discuss. Her email concluded with genuine regret about how her need for control and predictability had cost her a relationship with someone who'd proven capable of achieving exactly the kind of success she'd always claimed to want in a partner. I responded with kindness but finality, thanking her for the apology while making clear that chapter of my life was permanently closed and that I wished her well in finding someone whose goals aligned better with her priorities. The closure felt appropriate rather than vindictive. I harbored no resentment towards someone who'd simply revealed incompatible values during a crucial decision point in our relationship. Rachel and I had begun discussing marriage and children with the natural ease that comes from genuinely compatible life visions, and I'd started researching engagement rings with the same analytical approach I'd brought to evaluating my career transition. The difference was that this time I was planning a future with someone who'd proven herself capable of supporting ambitious goals rather than undermining them. Someone who saw challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to comfortable routines. Our conversations about the future involved exciting possibilities rather than anxious resistance to change, and I'd never felt more confident about my ability to build something meaningful with the right partner. Looking back on Kendra's dismissal of my career opportunity, I realized her refusal to even consider relocating had been the best thing that could have happened to both of us, though probably not in the way she'd intended. Her insistence that small-town life represented career suicide had freed me to discover not only professional success beyond my wildest expectations but also a lifestyle and community that aligned perfectly with my actual values rather than metropolitan social expectations. The boring lake town she'd refused to visit had become my ideal home, and her rejection of my ambitions had cleared the path for finding someone who'd appreciate both my drive and my achievements without needing to control either.